Hello everyone, this is FideMaster Victor News and thank you for joining our webinar. Today we are going to discuss what happens when one of the players voluntarily decides to not castle and which advantage he may obtain in such a case. Okay, before we start, please let me know if the video and audio quality is good because I'm doing this webinar from a completely different place. I moved from my previous apartment just yesterday, so I didn't have time to set everything up, but at least I could um, connect my extra monitor, other device, even some lighting to be able to conduct this webinar. Okay, so everything is good. Let's start. But before we start, let's talk about our previous topic. So previously we were talking about things that determine this chess strategy. And in that game between Bobby Fischer and Mark Taimanov, so if you remember, I gave you homework. Let me actually open it. Well, actually, the previous was devoted to how to defend in worst positions. So, and there were two questions. So the first question was about this position where b6 was 8x b6 was recently played, and the question was how to play from here for white. Well, is this knight hanging? Looks like not, because there is always bishop c4 opportunity. So, but if you play bishop c4 and then c6 and it's protected. So here, in order to stop it, white decided to play rook c6. And now if let's say this, then you can play bishop c4 successfully, and they have no pieces defending the d5. Well, the bishop can move, but you just win the bishop. So that's why rook c6 works, and such a move was played. The game continued with king h8. And queen h3 here makes a lot of sense. This move wasn't played, so now g5 knight is not under attack. So if they play rook f6, it's possible to play bishop c4 because the rook is poisoned. If rook takes c6, it's knight f7. So let's say f4 attacking the queen moves to h5, bishop b7 attacking the rook, and not even rook f6 because rook f6, queen f6, but rook e6. Rook e6, queen d7, and just rook e5. And well, white got the pawn back. Looks like the black's position is still fine. Well, it's approximately equal. Instead, in the game, white here played knight f3, which is not a good move. Bishop b7, and this is where they were completely lost. Here, they'd better take on h6 and sacrifice exchange by doing this, still having an attack. And it seems that black has to sacrifice exchange back because if, let's say, they play this move, saving the rook, it's knight g5 coming and queen h3. So queen e7, bishop f8, rook f8, and, well, it's approximately equal. The game continued with rook g6. It was a mistake. Yeah, it was a mistake. Let's go back. Here, knight f4. Bishop takes rook e6, queen c5. And after a few moves, my second question was how to bring more pieces to attack the white king in this position. So what do you think? No, this time, unfortunately, nobody sent any answers to the homework. Maybe it was too complicated, maybe because of some other reasons. So what do you think? How black should bring pieces? Well, queen c5 looks good, but queen c5, king f1, so you just repeat the position. Let me flip the board actually. So what black should do. So Bobby Fischer won that game because of his ability to coordinate pieces quite well. So some of you may say that you should take on f3. Well, but what if king takes f3? Because if, let's say, g takes f3, then you may continue with bishop d4 and queen g1. So it's, well, it's not the end of the game. So I don't know, queen g1 or maybe rook g8 first, and then something like that. But king escapes. Well, maybe bishop f2 wins the game because after pawn takes, you have queen h1. Checkmate. Rook e8, rook g8 is a check. So yeah, black should be winning here. But if king takes, then it's not clear how to continue. Bishop c6. So the bishop is required, this bishop. So simply bishop f8, threatening with bishop c5, and this is a deadly threat. After that b4 was played, bishop e4. Now queen e3 is a possibility. So rook e8. And that was a mistake. Well, they have to play this move, but this is a mistake because of bishop c6, double attack. They have to sacrifice the queen, and then Bobby Fischer successfully realized his advantage. Well, the rest of the game is not important. We are not going to focus on it. Let's talk about our current topic. Our current topic is about, so it's about voluntary forfeiture of castling. Well, in which cases it becomes possible? Well, actually, castling is a very helpful move. It does a lot of um, very important for the positional things. Well, why? Well, we move the king to the safe place. We no longer need to defend it with something else and take care about the position of the king during maybe the next 10 moves, from 5 to 10. And we also bring the rook to the game. If we don't castle, then how do we get the rook to the position, and what about the king's safety? So it makes sense to leave the king in the center when the king is relatively safe there. I'm going to illustrate several games where it's true. However, we're gonna start with the game between Spassky and Furman, where white kept the king in the center, but the king was the object of the attack. So if you think that your rook on the h file, for example, is okay, maybe it supports the attack on the enemy king, or maybe there is a chance that you open the h file and you may need the rook there, then okay, keep the rook there. So then you may consider not castling. If you think that you have to play with the king and lose your castling privilege, but at the same time you may keep your other benefits of the position, then okay, you can also keep the king in the center. Also, it does make sense to keep the king in the center if you think, well, it's a kind of a psychological trick when you think that your opponent may sacrifice more material in order to take advantage of your king's position. There are actually a lot of openings where keeping the king in the center makes a lot of sense. Let's start with these games. Spassky, Boris Spassky against Semen Furman. King's Gambit. So, well, it's a very specific opening. Well, nowadays it's considered to be unsound, or I would say semi-sound. The king is in a danger, so white doesn't have enough activity here if black plays properly. But if white knows the lines better than black, they may play. They may still have this opening in their opening repertoire in order to create problems. Well, for example, in Evans' Gambit, white plays for a win, and if black play makes a mistake, which is easy, in a very sharp position, then well, white wins. But if black plays properly, they are able to equalize the position. So if I would suggest which gambit to play, I would say play Evans Gambit. In King's Gambit, if black plays properly, they have advantage. So if you are a 45 player with black, then you definitely need to learn how to play against King's Gambit. So knight c3, this is also a specific move. Typically, people play knight f3 to stop queen h4 here. But knight c3, queen h4, and here Spassky decided to choose this variation where his king has to stay in the center. g3 fails, knight f3, and in this position, of course, it's possible to go to h5, but it's not the biggest problem for white. What is the biggest problem for white in this position? How should black play to obtain advantage? Who can tell me? So g2, yeah, thank you. It's g2 check, knight takes queen, but black takes a rook and promotes a new queen. So here black is a queen, rook up. So that's why king e2, and black continues their attack by doing d5. This makes a lot of sense. It allows to bring the bishop to the game as well as to open the d file to be able to attack with their rook after black decides to castle queenside. So knight d5, bishop d6, c7 has to be protected. Also f4 is protected now. Such a move like bishop g4 wasn't so good, but I think it was playable too. For example, knight c6, knight c7, sacrifice in exchange, and then playing knight e5. And with knight e5, we are threatening to take several times and finally play queen h5 to attack this queen on d1. Well, I can show you. So just a random move. Knight f3, pawn takes, bishop takes, king takes, queen h5. So this queen is hanging, and unfortunately for white, there is no bishop b5 check or something like that because the king is on a dark square. Well, they can play queen e1 in this position, let's say queen e1, still knight f3. If well, if g takes f3, it's bishop f3, and after the king takes, the queen is still lost. So it seems that this move is a must. Then knight h4, check, and it seems that this knight is trapped. So it's two minor pieces for rook and the pawn for black. So black gets two minor pieces with such a uh, active pieces location. Black should be better here. So bishop g4 could make sense. Instead, it was bishop d6, which is also fine. Knight f3, bishop g4 now, d4, knight c6. And, well, in such situations, when you keep the king in the center, you should pay attention to the pawns in the center, how well they cover your king and how easier it is for your opponent to attack your king. So doing something like c3 makes a lot of sense. You defend there, you can move the king later if they try to attack it. And well, if this move, probably you take. Um, Instead, it was e5, which is logical, but at the same time, this is a move that makes the king more vulnerable, and castle queen side should be considered. So e takes d6 is a mistake. There is a strong attack with this move. The knight is hanging. The knight doesn't have many squares. For example, in case of c4, you can just continue with knight f6, and once this knight goes away, you just take on d4, and the king is in so big trouble. If, let's say, they take on f4, then knight takes d4 right away. So, and they discover the attack winning the queen. Okay, so bishop f4 was played in the game. Spassky decided to not open the file. Knight g7, trying to open the position, and c4. So white concentrated their pieces in the center. If this king, let's say, was only one instead of a rook there, white would be strategically winning. But the king is only two, and black has chances. So e takes d6. Well, now I want you to find the best move for black in this position. So black could still get some advantage in this position if he played properly, but it's not so easy. So what would you suggest? So rook h8 or bishop f3. Okay, so let's start with rook h8. Logical move. However, then the king goes there. So maybe it's too early. Okay, so what if we try to take on f3 first? G takes f3, and then we take there. So the king goes here, and c6, trying to chase the knight away. So if, let's say, the knight moves, if the knight moves, it's queen f4. So the key idea is to force the knight to move. Here, why not to take the bishop? Yes, to take the bishop then. Why not? What's wrong with knight f d4, the move that was played in the game? There is no c6 then. So if, well, the king goes to d3 again. Now bishop f3, g takes f3, c takes d6. There is no compensation for repeats because the bishop was sacrificed on d6, and because of the ability of this knight to capture and then play c6 in order to win this bishop, black is completely fine. But after knight fd4, the king moves to d3, where it's relatively safe, while black activity is not enough. So bishop e2, knight e6. The bishop retreats. C takes d6, and there is no attack on this king. But instead, what would you suggest for white? What would you play? So king c3, moving the king to away from the place of faction does make sense, but how safe the king is there? And do we really need to spend the tempo on this move? Well, knight c5 is the only check that can be delivered here. Well, I don't think that bishop f5 or queen g6 is good because moving the king to c3 is, I mean, brings the king to a safer place. In the game, it was b4, and b4 is a much better move. So it stops a check. It allows the king to be hidden on b3 under the pawn on b4. And also this move helps to initiate the attack on the enemy king in future. So rook h8, rook e1, this move, king moves away. Why? Well, take. Because right now it's hanging. The pawn is hanging. So this queen h6, queen c1, offering an exchange of the queens. This move looks logical, but after bishop d3, it seems that there should be an exchange of the rooks. Another check on f6, but king c2, and well, knight b4 is playable by the first glance, but after king b3, it's actually a cross check, and the knight is lost, and the rook is hanging too. So this to keep the queen on the c file to be able to do this cross check with king b3, bishop f3, d takes c6, bishop takes c6, and there is no compensation for the bishop. Well, two pawns, but they are not enough, especially if grandmasters are playing. Well, after a few moves, it became obvious that the position is already decided, and soon black decided to resign. So with more pieces being exchanged, white's advantage becomes more decisive. So please keep it in mind. When you have extra material, try to exchange pieces. You shouldn't exchange pieces whatever it costs, but if you see that you can just make approximately equal exchange, do it, because it simplifies the position, and it's harder for you to make a mistake once the position becomes more simple. Okay, so why did why did Spassky decided why did Spassky decide to keep the king in the center in this game? Well, because he thought that his opponent is likely to play for a win in such a case, would start sacrificing pieces and attacking the king in the center. So it was a kind of a trap. Uh, King 2 attracted black to play for a win and sacrifice pieces by initiating the attack and trying to deliver a checkmate. So if black played more accurately, they of course would take advantage of this king being in the center. So here king 2 is a bit unsound. Let's talk about the second game I prepared for today. This time it was Vladimir Kramnik playing against Peter Leko. Well, it was a famous variation. I played myself for black, Moscow variation of Semislav defense, e3, g6, and e4. So a very specific move. Typically, e4 can be played right away. Then this, and after king b2, after bishop b4, the king has to go to e2. But this time, Kramnik decided to provoke g6 and then play d4. Well, we cannot withstand. I mean, black cannot withstand with against such a pawn center because e5 is coming. This bishop becomes bad. This bishop on g7 becomes bad. So they have to take now knight e4 and bishop b4. So king e2 is a must. If white wants to play for a win, they have to play king e2 in this position. But why did they keep the king on e2? They played king e2 because they didn't have a better option. For example, if they decided to block with the e knight, then just castle, bishop d3, knight goes there, and then c5 or e5 is coming, after which both bishops are good, and black doesn't have a domination in the center anymore. So, I mean, white doesn't have a domination in the center, and black is likely to realize their bishop pair. What can you say about such a move like knight c3? How will black play in such a case? Because anything else is not possible. So this move blunders the pawn on d4. So knight c3 with this knight or moving the king. What's wrong with knight c3? So what would you suggest? By the way, let me know if there are any disruptions here or you can clearly hear me, and at least in Zoom. Okay. So how to take advantage of this pin? Any suggestions? Black can attack d4 with 3 pawns. Well, actually with the c pawn. And with the e. No, not with the e because of 95, but with the c. Why? Because this time they can bring the queen to the attack. So d takes c5 is a blunder. But how to play? Because then knight c6 is played, and there is still enough pressure here, as well as enough pressure on d4. So queen b3 probably to try to get rid of it. But then c takes d4, queen takes there, this. And if we exchange the queens, look at the pawn structure. Black is definitely much better here. So this is a theoretical variation, so I know it, and I know that the king has to move to e2 because all other options are better. So knight c3, for example, was bad because of c5. Knight ed2 is bad because black can open the position and take advantage of their bishop pair. Let's continue. Queen f4 because the queen was under attack. Queen d3, bishop goes back to cover these squares, and the queen goes back too. But white kept the king in the center, but had a strong pawns on c4 and d4. So they had some domination and the control over the center. That's why if now they can play g3, especially if they play g3 with a tempo bishop g2 and bring this rook to the center, to the e1 or d1, then they can evacuate their king to f1 and make artificial castling at any moment. So the key idea of this variation was to keep the king in the center, but instead of, as a compensation for such a drawback, white kept his center control. And if only white castles artificially, then he has advantage. So this move, b6, trying to fianchetto. King f1, bishop b7. What would you continue in this position? What do you think? Knight e5. Okay, knight e5. Interesting. Knight takes e5, pawn takes e5. Let's say queen takes e5. So what's the purpose of knight e5? So maybe knight h4. Well, I don't see the purpose of this move. So here, because of the domination in the center, and because white doesn't want black to activate his pieces, c5 was played. It stops the bishop on b7 and makes the c6 pawn potentially a weakness, as well as may provide us with the d6 square. So taking doesn't make sense. D takes, knight takes, knight takes, knight, bishop takes, and finally queen c3 at the very end. So it completely fails. a5. King g1. Well, a5 was played to stop before, and then king g1. Well, because that was a threat. Only now black castles, and white tries to take advantage or realize their already existing advantage. So here they play queen e3, protecting on c5 and putting pressure here. King g7. And this is where they played knight e5, which I don't like at all, because this move only simplifies the position. What would you suggest instead of knight e5? Rook d1? Well, rook d1 is good. I agree. This is a helpful move. What else? Rook ac1 is a nice idea too. Maybe rook ac1 is even better, because if you take, then c6 can be a weakness. I would instead prefer focus on the king side. The position is closed, and the center is unlikely to be open, at least not soon, because anything like that doesn't make sense, and f5 makes e6 so vulnerable. So that's why attacking on the king side is a good idea. So this to remaneuver the bishop b3 to stop it. Rook a d8, h5, g5, and let's just consolidate our pieces, because this pawn structure is much weaker than g6 and h6, and maybe you can invade the enemy camp later in the game. But knight e5 was played, and this move decided the game. So for example, in case of queen e5, You would just play c takes b6. But b takes c5 was played instead. Knight takes, rook f d8, rook a c1, and the position is very slightly better for white. White, I mean, black makes a critical mistake and white loses the game immediately. But what would you suggest for black in this position? Yes, they are under the pressure, and probably that cost, I mean, that um, led to a mistake that the fact that they were defending their position and they were under the pressure. It's not easy to come up with a plan because of all these things. They were pressured and made a mistake. But what would you recommend for uh, black in this position to keep playing and to try to equalize it? So bishop g5 to force f4 and create weaknesses. Okay, it does make sense. I agree. But then bishop goes to e7. Maybe h5, h4, h5 can be played as well. Of course, after h4, you can react with h5 yourself. So yes, it was also a mistake. Instead, you should liquidate this. Why you should liquidate this knight? Well, let's say rook takes and then rook d7. This is a permanent weakness. And actually, if we know that two grandmasters are playing against each other and the white player is not much weaker than the black one, then black would have to passively stay and defend the position because they have these weaknesses while white can directly attack them. So maybe maybe this attack is not decisive here, but here the game is played only for two results. Either white wins or black is able to hold the position. That was the best move, and this is what black decided to not play. They played this and simply blundered knight b7, queen b7, and bishop c6, losing exchange. So same thing would happen in case of bishop g5, f4, bishop e7, knight takes, this move, and then this. So the exchange is lost. It's not possible to play queen e7 because bishop takes a1, and this move is not playable. So a4, and they lost the game quickly. I don't think that the rest requires any analysis here. There was a pressure, yes, on f7, and a4 is also hanging. So this is where Peter Leka resigned. Well, the plan of white actually worked. Having the king in the center was not such a big disadvantage comparing to the advantages that white already existed. Like they had some initiative and they had their pawns in the center. And because of fewer pieces, fewer black pieces being developed, the attack on this king becomes impossible. So there is no way to attack the king on e2. And this plan seems to be very quick and will help to keep the king in the safe place, but at the same time hold these two pawns in the center. Okay, game number three. Game number three. Well, I'm not sure if you know both players, but you probably are familiar with Lubomir Lubayevich. The black player was Andros Anderjan. So the game is quite old. Let's see what happened. So it was Sveshnikov Sicilian with a weird move order. So knight b5, d6, bishop f4, how to protect this pawn. So only e5 works, knight e5 this time fails. Bishop g5, a6, knight a3, and after b5, knight d5. It's also possible to play like that and then knight d5. There are several lines, but this one is the most popular one. Bishop e7, and who can actually tell me what white should play in this position? So queen d2, what's the purpose of queen d2? Take f6 and c3. So take on f6 with a bishop. And then c3, bishop d3, castle, knight c2, a4. This is the plan. In the game, white didn't choose the best continuation. They took on e7, and this bishop on e7 isn't so good. But then they took on f6, so they thought that with this pawn structure they can take advantage because d6 is a backward pawn, and while the pawn is here, castling without bishop on g7 is too risky. True, but black didn't want to castle here. So c4, trying to open the position. Bishop b7. So what is going on in this position? Here, black decides to voluntarily forfeiture from castling. So they don't want to castle because of several reasons. First of all, it's a tempo loss. Second, the king is not better on g8 comparing to e8. Most likely, the king should be on f8 because from f8 it's hard to reach the king's position. For example, queen d2, queen h6, but just a simple move h5 would allow us to control the h6 square with our rook. And the most important factor is that by keeping the king in the center here, black may develop initiative because they are better developed. They are attacking here, they are ready to play d5 or even f5 and attack the pawn on g2. Then there are such checks like queen e5, also playable. For example, c takes b5, bishop e4. So black pieces here are more centralized and they're about to start pushing this and having advantage. Queen e4, threatening with this, d5. So b takes a6, and now king f8. So this king is actually even more weak than the black one. Queen b4, making a pin. Rook g8. So f3, now this bishop has to move. So the bishop goes to f5. Castle queen side, later they did play this move. Okay. Uh, so g4, bishop c8, and castle queen side. Well, it seems safe, but even there, the king is in the danger. Bishop a6, king goes to b1 as a prophylaxis. And now, after d4, we can definitely say that, well, rook b8 first, or maybe queen moves, the king goes there, this rook to b8, the knight goes to d5, and black dominates in the game. But king g7 was played in advance in order to get the knight unpinned. Then knight b5, knight c6 with a tempo, queen c5, and queen a5. So this king is safer than this one. And the attack on the enemy king is coming. So who can tell me what's wrong with queen takes c6? Okay, so I see some suggestions. Queen c6, bishop b5. Yes, it's bishop b5. Okay, so bishop b5. Then if bishop b5, it's queen a2, king goes to the c file and just a pin. So if bishop b5, queen b5, then queen a2, and it's still a big problem because then you can play rook a b8 move, threatening with this and threatening to take on b2. So for example, queen e2 to protect, just this check, king d2, and it's just a disaster. So should we play this, or actually maybe it does make sense to play queen a5? This move. Not sure. Not sure. Maybe this is better actually because where he goes here, then you can take. Then king goes to e1, and then this position. Well, okay, so it's still winning in both cases. And actually, another suggestion is to take on a2 first and then take on b5. But this time you only win a pawn. Actually, no, you lose even because they can capture on e8. So you have to take on b5 first. Yeah, that's why queen c6 wasn't played. Instead, a4 and knight d4. So because there is a pin. They played b3, but that was already a mistake. Well, it's hard to suggest anything because bishop b5 is coming, then queen a2 or queen e1. Or this rook move and then bishop takes b5. Because then after bishop takes, you can also take with a knight. So it's hard to suggest anything. They played b3, knight b3. Queen takes d5, but after queen b4, they have to resign because it's a discovered attack coming. If king a2, it's queen a4. So it's a completely losing position, unfortunately. So, okay, what did happen in the game? So black decided to keep the king in the center on f8 and later maybe moving it to g7, but not right away. They first played rook g8 to provoke f3, which is not a good move. I mean, well, white had to play f3, but that created more weaknesses in the enemy camp. So the king on f8 was not so weak. That was the first reason to keep the king in the center. And the second one was to not spend the tempo on castling, but instead speed up pieces development, because in this position, these pieces are better located and the center control allows black to play for a win. And also there was another factor, the enemy king's weakness. So castling to the king side after f3 is too risky. Castling to the queen side is possible, but even there the king is unsafe, and black can do what they did in the game. So here, not castling for initiative. The next example from which we are going to play, it was French defense and another theoretical variation. So here c3 and knight e2 with the idea of bringing the other knight to f3 to be able to hold this pawn chain. So queen b6, knight f3, c takes d4, c takes d4. This is protected enough, and bishop b4 is played. So here, well, it's quite common when chess players play bishop d2 and the game continues with this. This endgame is favorable for white. White here wins more often, but well, a draw can be played too. However, in the game it was king f1. It's also a playable move. But can you please answer why, I mean, which plan does white have in mind when they decide to play king f1? Well, yeah, so what about the rook on h1? How this rook becomes active? And does the king have to stay on f1 for a while? Okay, so John thinks that a3 b4. Well, John, a3 b4 is not a mistake and definitely part of the plan. But mhm. But the key idea of white and French defense is to play on the king side. So such moves like g4 or g3, h4 with h5 and some attack trying to use the rook on the h file are very common. And the good point is that there are not so many black pieces on the king side. That's why having a king, not castled, doesn't lead to weaknesses. So black continued with f6. Knight f4 attacking here. Well, if you play knight f8, then you have to play passively because g3, king g2, and you cannot fight for the center anymore. So the reason of f6 is to force this move. But knight f4, f takes e5, knight takes e6, and we are going to continue from this moment, from knight f6. I'm sure the next move is obvious for you. So let me share the position that we are going to start with. this one. Oops, let me share it to the whole chat. So now we are going to chess.com, and who wants to play this for white against me, just message me, please. Send your username here on in the chat. Okay, before we continue with this, again, if you want to support the work I'm doing at the webinars, you can always do it using this button, donate. Here I can send you the link. So it's a very simple process. You click the button, you enter the amount that you want to donate. Then you click PayPal, and after you log into your account, this money will be automatically delivered to my account, so to my PayPal account. So it helps me to prepare for the webinars much better, as well as to pay salaries for my assistants, for people assisting me. So, for example, I'm working with a FIDE master and one girl who helps me publishing all these webinars. Let's continue. So we are going to play on chess.com. There is a message. Oops. So the guy didn't get the link. Okay, let me invite him. Actually, I should do it in the form of a link. This. And this one, let's delete it. Okay, fine. So yeah, let's go to the play section. What other news I would like to share? By the way, we are going to start group classes. Well, this is what I'm saying almost every webinar, but this time we are very close to announce the sales. So it will be less than $10 for 1 hour and 30 minutes class. So 90 minutes class. We are going to have classes twice a week on Mondays and Fridays. So there are two options. You can pay two different plans. You can pay with installments, or you can pay the whole amount right away. If you pay the whole amount, there will be some discount provided. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Brian. Well, so we're gonna play. Who would like to play? Let me know your usernames. Here I choose custom, 15 plus 10. Then we're gonna play this position. I'm going to play with black pieces. So who wants to play? I know that John wants. I think. Okay. Yes, I sent the challenge to Parallax. Yeah, here. So I think the first move is obvious. A5. Okay, E5. Very nice idea. What can I do? Actually, I think this is not so good because I can play knight G4, threatening the mate and threatening to take on G7. So let me see if I have anything else. So I'm going to play with everyone who sends me his username. I'm playing with black pieces. Tell me your username and we will play. So knight g4, this and these are the problems. Well, is there a way to defend the position? Maybe e6 works. No, it doesn't seem so. Knight g5. Actually, e6 may work. After e6, I can capture on g7 right away. I'm sure John finds something. So like bishop e3, well, bishop e3 I can take with the queen, I think. Bishop e3, f takes e3, knight takes, it's a fork. So maybe you can play knight g5. Knight g5, king g7, so it's still protected. What else? What else? Just defend it. Yeah, you have to just defend it. Then what should I do? Take on a5? No. Take on f2. Interesting. Let me first take. Anybody else wants to play? Please let me know. Maybe I can even copy the link to everyone here. So by clicking this link, you are likely to start our game. Okay, so the second game. H3, So what should I do this time? I think I should sacrifice actually. Because where I go here, then it's bishop h6, king h6. How much material do I have in such a case if I sacrifice? I'm a pawn down. Okay, and another game. Okay, let me open it. So here, this move. Okay, I can play e4, h3, and the other game. So here, you have to play. Oops, why is it? No, I would like to play from a certain position. From the position that I suggest. We are talking about the king in the center and why do people sometimes decide to keep the king in the center instead of castling. Okay, so sacrificing on f2 doesn't look like a good idea. Queen takes, king takes. Then I can play rook f8 to try to take on a5, but it seems to not work as well as I wanted. So what else do I have? h5. h5 makes more sense, and maybe this is what I choose. Because after h takes g4, I take with my bishop, and it's still a complicated position where I can pressure f3 and win a pawn on a5, probably. But just knight h6, bishop h6, king h6, is it a problem? No, it seems to not be a big problem. Okay, knight e5. So how do I play? Okay, I have to take. I don't think I have a better move. And then maybe bishop g4. Bishop e2. Maybe knight g4 still works. Yeah, knight g4 still works actually. Yeah, let's do knight g4. Threatening this, and this. Yeah, I think it's a tough position for white already. Uh, yeah, e6. Well, e6. Yeah, I was thinking about e6, but then I just take it. How does e6 help you? Because you cannot take with a knight. You are checkmated then. So if anybody else wants to play, tell me your username. I'll challenge you from this position. Aha, so knight g4 is coming. Well, then I take. Aha, I got it. So what should I do in this position? Can I play this move? Looks like it doesn't make much sense. I can try this. No, then h7 is weak. So queen d4, maybe knight d4 is also. No, knight d4 blocks my queen. But okay, after knight d4, I can capture with my queen on h6. So it works better. But what about queen e3 just? Ah, knight f5 then. Okay, yes, I would like to play it. This, but this is a checkmate on f2. So it looks like you didn't notice it. That's the reason. So knight d4 is played mainly to connect my queen. Okay, queen h5. Then I would like to play this move to exchange the bishops. Because in case of bishop h6, queen h6, I'm attacking the queen. That's why my bishop is not hanging. And in case of, let's say, not this, but queen g5, I'm going to play queen g6. So we play the challenge. We should play from the position that I announced, where you take on g7, I move my king to f7. Okay, this. Well, mm, so what should I do? So one option is this, but there is another option. Doing this move makes sense. Yeah, doing this move makes a lot of sense. Let's just choose which is better, queen b5 or queen e6. So queen a6, I'm keeping protection of this. King cannot go to e1. There is no possibility to block. King goes there, knight e2, and that's it. Okay, queen a6. So how does it work? King goes there, knight e2, and then knight g3. Unfortunately, there is no perpetual check because every time I move the queen to f1, there is a knight that can capture. So e2 is protected by the queen, and the king uh, can go to h2. Right. So knight e2. Can I do a windmill actually if I take here first? Yeah, I think I can. So I think I can do a windmill. Knight c1, knight e2 back, and knight g3 is a must. King goes there. So queen f1 fails, but knight takes h5 works. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the game. Well, you made a mistake in the very beginning. We are going to analyze it. Let me stop sharing it and share the webinars. I mean the game. The original game, I mean. Portion. Okay, here we are. So, knight takes g7 was definitely good. King goes, and this is where you guys made mistakes. So d takes e5 allows me to play this move. You have to play queen e2. I take there, and you have some compensation in case of h3. Knight goes there. Maybe a3 also. Oh, with something like that, you have a compensation here. But, so what was the other move actually? Bishop h6. But bishop h6 is a mistake. Bishop h6 is a mistake. e4 and knight e5 doesn't work so well. Knight e5, d takes e5, and knight g4 with the same idea. So e6, yes, but after bishop e6, you still have to play queen e2. But it doesn't work because I just win on h6 and I'm a piece up with no compensation at all. So there was only a compensation um, in case of d takes e5, knight g4, and then queen e2 was played, like what happened in the game with John. So we can actually go through this game a little. D takes e5, this move, queen e2, I take. What happens then? So here John played well, but then it was it h3 actually? Let me check. Yes, h3, knight h6, knight h2. Okay, so h3, knight h6, knight h2. So instead of a3, and you would you could still play for a win. And I reacted with knight d4. And after this move, I played bishop f5. So I think after bishop f5, my position is already good because what you can do. So if you take, I take with, no, if you take, then I do this. So you cannot take. What you can try is probably, actually, I don't know. It seems like bishop f5 is a very good move. Maybe queen g5 instead. But then bishop g6 is a possibility. After bishop g6, I'm not threatening to take, and queen h6 is a check. Okay, clear. No, queen g6 is a must. But then it seems if we exchange the queens, my position is fine. So bishop f5 was a very good move. Yeah, okay, bishop f5, bishop takes a5, queen a6, king here, knight e2, this, this, knight g3. So I wanted to show you that there is no perpetual smothered mate because, first of all, if they take with a rook, knight e2 is not a checkmate because there is a queen. Also taking with the knight, and even if knight e2 was possible, but it's not, the king escapes to h2. So smothered mate is not playable, but a few forks can be played and the position may become winning. So knight h5 was played in the original game, and that was a really good move. Why? Because after this move, it's knight g5 and queen takes h5, bringing the queen to the attack. So queen takes d4. The bishop is hanging. They played bishop e2, covering this square too. And with this move, it was possible for black to stay a little worse and maybe initiate their own attack on f2. Let's say king moves, knight f7. They sacrifice bishop e6. Looks like black gets some pieces activity with these moves. However, white is still winning, of course. Bishop e6 was played. That was a mistake. Now queen h6 attacking. Bishop f7, there was an exchange, and the king's position is now compromised. So bishop g5, and this can be the next move. King g8, queen e6, checkmate. So they played king e8. Now it's just a different order. This, and if the king goes to f8, it's a checkmate with a bishop. So knight e7 was played, and after that, it's a checkmate after bishop b5. Why? Well, this still did, and if this move, it's queen d7. So two ways. This is where they resigned. Well, they could try to defend with a bishop, but it seems actually it seems to be a better move. Then probably the simplest is just to capture, play this move. If king f8, then queen f6, and you win there. Let me show you. So this, okay, you checkmate actually. And if king goes to d8, then it's queen d6. The king has to move further and leave this knight hanging. So you can take, but maybe instead you decide to deliver checks, but at least after queen e7, you are completely winning. So here, the whole concept of leaving the king on f1 was to keep the position more complicated, to be able to use the rook on the h file with the ideas of doing like g4, h4, h5, or just h4, h5, and the king will stay there. But later, the king may go to g2, which is a safe place. So king f1, because the rook was required on the h file. Why didn't have a chance to use this rook? But because the position was complicated, they get new opportunities that black was not familiar with, and that's the reason why black lost. So if you remember, the biggest mistake was knight f6. So here g6 instead should be played, d takes e5, knight takes, bishop e3, queen e5, and this is where black almost equalized. That was the best way to play. Fine, guys. Thank you for coming at our webinar today. So I think we are done. Again, if you want to donate, you can do it using this button. This button, the link is in the chat. So enter the amount and click PayPal. Then it redirects you to your PayPal account. What else? So you can also send me a friend request. This is my profile, and soon I will announce our group classes. Also, I don't know if you are familiar with my recent Chessable course, train train your tactical vision. So yeah, it seems that people like the course. It has only 4 stars, but it's because of one bad rating. However, mainly they enjoy the course. So if you like it, while the course is on sale, you can purchase it. Well, if you need it. This is where I explain how to train your tactical vision. If you enter the course, you'll see such chapters like mating patterns, typical tactical motives, where I explain how to find and how to recognize them in your games, as well as a chapter where I explain how to create tactics when the position is calm. So if you are a tactician, you might be interested in it at least. Uh, Fine, so we are done for today. So see everyone next Sunday. I will announce the topic. And by the way, you are going to get the homework. Uh, so this is your homework. We are going to discuss next time these two positions, these two. What white should do here and how white should take advantage of the enemy king being in the center. These are more like exemptions of the rule, that even in the center it does make sense to keep the king because of some other advantages that a player who decides to not castle achieves. Fine, for today we are done. So any questions? If you have anything, I'm ready to answer. If not, let's meet next Sunday, same time. Okay, fine. So let me finish the conference then, and I hope everyone will join again next weekend. See you then. Bye bye.